Joining me now, best guest ever, former Ambassador Qatar, Ambassador Patrick Theros. Mr. Ambassador, it's great to have you, sir.
It's always great to be there, John. It's a lot of fun on your show.
So let's just start with the Holy Land, Mr. Ambassador. This is one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on. There's a lot going on in politics today, and we kind of forget with pandemics and everything that there's people in need all over the earth. And I want to talk about Christian families in the Holy Land at this time of year. Normally, hundreds of thousands of pilgrims and tourists would normally go to Jerusalem in Israel and Bethlehem. For visitors, as you know, this is a trip for many of their life. For Christians in the Holy Land, it's a sacred privilege to host people from every corner of the globe and something their families have done for generations. But 2020 is not a normal year. Tell us what's happening, sir.
In the past, over 1 million people will be there for each of the two Easter services. There's the Western churches celebrate Easter usually a week or so ahead of the Eastern churches. So over 1.5 million people show up for each of the two services. The Christian communities of Bethlehem and Jerusalem and some of the other towns where there are sites to visit, the location of Jesus' baptism in the Jordan River and other places like Jericho. The Christian families of the Holy Land almost exclusively survive off the tourism. There's also Christmas tourism. There's tourism later in the year. There are the tour guides. There are the restaurants. It's the hotels. It's the handicrafts they make. It's the church services. It's the church crosses and statues and different other things they make for the pilgrims. That is zeroed out. We now have people that quite literally have not earned any money whatsoever since February. And these are not well-to-do families. These are people who are just barely scraping through in the best of times, given the politics of the region and so forth. So now the churches traditionally have provided for the Christians there, but now the churches are facing a real problem, the one they had not precedented. Almost all the churches in Jerusalem survive primarily by the rents they receive from the lands they own. Well, if the tenant isn't making any money, he can't pay any rent. If the business isn't making any money, he can't pay any rent. So the churches have pretty much stopped collecting rent. So they're eating through their, I don't want to say their endowment funds, but they're eating through their saved money at an unbelievable rate. I'm not saying the state of Israel itself has not taken care of it to a degree, but there's only so much it can do.
Right.
And so now the churches have all, I suppose there is a silver lining to every cloud. For the first time in a very long time, all of the 12 churches established in the Holy Land, which are the Greek Orthodox, the Latin Catholics, the Armenians, the Copts, the Assyrians, the Anglicans, all the churches established in the Holy Land have banded together and have created an organization called the International Conference of the Holy Sepulchre. We know the Holy Sepulchre is the tomb of Jesus.
Right.
So this is a single organization. It's been put together by all 12 of the churches. Mm-hmm. And proper governing board and stuff like that. They have established themselves in Britain as the British equivalent of a 501c3 as a charity, and they're beginning to collect money. Where does this money go? It primarily goes to feeding people. It also supports a half dozen hospitals that are run by the churches in the Holy Land. And these are hospitals that don't treat just Christians. They treat anybody who walks in the door, and a couple of them are particularly good hospitals. They have a school system with 50,000 kids that charges tuition, but the tuition doesn't cover it. And in this case, the parents don't have any money to pay the tuition. So just to give you an idea, one of the churches, the Greek Orthodox Church, has got an annual budget of about $80 or $90 million a year. And that is the churches, the hospitals, the relief, the various charitable organizations it runs, plus maintaining the various important shrines like the Church of the Resurrection, like the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. All that takes money and so forth, and that's all dried up. So there we are, and they've now established the this foundation. As I say, it's registered in the United Kingdom.
Right.
We are trying to get it also registered in the United States as a charity. Those things take a certain amount of time because U.S. laws are stricter than in many countries because we're afraid of the diversion of money, say particularly money going to Israel and Palestine, being diverted into the wrong hands. So establishing an American charity is not easy. It's a lot more complicated than in the United Kingdom. So at the moment, they are going through another 501c3 that is established here that represents them as a charity. It's slightly more complicated.
We're with Ambassador Patrick Theros, former Ambassador Qatar.
Yeah.
In the short term, you want to raise $300,000. And this is a big deal because, as you outlined, people can't go to school. These Christians and these churches depend on the tourism. That's all they have, and they're not having it. And so it's a horrible situation. $300,000 is not an insurmountable amount of money, especially when you look at all the money that's wasted by these politicians that we're all sending. So if I want to send money, $50, $100, how do I do it right now?
You go on to their website, which is www.icohs.org, and I've got to open it up again because they had I got to re-look at this one more time, and then you.
It's the
then there's a
ICOS, so it's ICOHS.
ICOHS.
ICOHS.com.
Yeah. And then to the right you'll see and then up to the right you'll see a Donate Now, which will take you to another website, which is an organization called Signatory in New York, which
right, and then you can donate there.
Charity.
Better off sending it here to these politicians. I get a text from the Trump campaign every 20 minutes asking me for money. Okay, I would rather send some money. As much as I like Donald J. Trump and I want him to win, I would rather send the money to these Christians in the Holy Land. John Fredericks Radio Network with Ambassador Patrick Theros, former ambassador to Qatar in the U.S. He was in Doha for a long time and a careerist with the State Department, many times Charge d'Affaires. So he's been around the world 3 times to Wednesday, as they say in radio vernacular. The Lebanon government, how did those explosives stay there in that area, packed in for 7 years?
It was worse than that. This ship was owned by a Russian company, and it was carrying sort of a shady company, but it was carrying fertilizer to Mozambique, from Russia to Mozambique. For some reason, because the owner was running out of money, he diverted it to Beirut port to pick up another small cargo because he needed everything there. And when he got there, Beirut port, he didn't have enough money to pay the port charges. Ships stayed there and stayed there. Finally, his company went bankrupt. The Lebanese government took the fertilizer, 2,750 tons of fertilizer, and put it into a warehouse, quote, as a temporary measure, when the done would have been just to wave the port fee and let the ship go away. And then it sat there. Meanwhile, not only did it sit there in an unair-conditioned warehouse, and this stuff is a little bit volatile, they started storing other chemicals in the same warehouse. And I've just seen a report this morning indicating that among the other chemicals were paints and paint thinners. Well, I discovered I went and checked it online. At 101 degrees Fahrenheit, paint thinner starts to combust.
Right.
So that's a warning for your house. If you've got any paint thinner around the house, make sure you don't have it in a place where the temperature can get over 100 degrees. And the Port Authority people kept saying to the government, we got to get it out of here, but it takes a certain amount of money. The Port Authority didn't have the money. The government just ignored it. In this one case, I think it was a little bit of corruption, but it was probably 90% just a bunch of really bad politicians at the top who weren't going to give the money to the port because they would rather, that was one less amount of money they could steal for themselves.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and so apparently, the beginning of the investigation is it looks like the paint thinner may have combusted.
It's incredible. The level of incompetence. Letting that sit there. The ship comes in, they can't pay the fees. The ship breaks down. They got all this stuff. They got all these explosives sitting there for 7 years. Nobody does anything about it. You got paint thinner there that you said everybody knows that is in the business, combusted at 101 degrees, and that's sitting there. It was a question of. You can almost ask the question: why did it take so long? Right? Why did it take 7 years? It's unbelievable, unbelievable that this happened. How is this going to impact Hezbollah leadership there? What they're going to get a new government. If you're Hezbollah now, aren't you responsible for some of this? How do you run away from that?
Hezbollah is probably going to come out of this better than the other politicians.
How?
Hezbollah, several reasons. One is Hezbollah, in the eyes of the Lebanese people, is not as uncorrupt, but it's less corrupt than the older politicians. Hezbollah is a new organization, relatively speaking, whereas the older politicians are big political families, like the Kennedys and the Bushes and stuff like that, except they go back a couple of hundred years, and they've been running the country for the last couple of hundred years, and they've never budged. So Hezbollah is a newer organization, and it's an organization as opposed to sort of family enterprise. It's got people tend to believe it more than they do the other politicians. So I think Hezbollah is going to come out of this damaged, but in better shape than the other politicians. It's one of the foreign governments just get lazy themselves and say, these guys have been running the country for the last 200 years, let them, who cares? And they let things slide and slide and slide until they blow up, either politically or, in this case, literally blow up. And right now, you see this blame game. Each of the politicians in Lebanon is saying, ain't my trouble, it's the guy over there.
Right. Right.
So,
well,
I honestly, they've bankrupted the country. They've thoroughly bankrupted the country. Central Bank was caught doing a Ponzi scheme, if you can imagine that.
Unbelievable.
Now, among other things, the explosion also blew away the grain silos in the port. So something like 75% of the stored grain in Lebanon is now gone. And they've only got about 4 or 5 weeks of grain in other storage facilities left for the whole country. Meanwhile, they're really in trouble. The other countries that they might have been able to get food supplies from there, Syria's a wreck. It's another failed state. The rest of the Mediterranean is gearing up for war between themselves, between Turkey and Greece and Egypt and so forth, and Libya. I don't want to use bad language, but you can imagine the Lebanese are now effed.
They're in a tough situation, but I kind of agree with you after listening to Mr. Ambassador that Hezbollah comes out of this the big winner, because Hezbollah thrives in a world of government chaos, right? That's right. Where they thrive. Wherever they win, it's when, they're going to bring order to chaos. And even though they were part of the government, they can claim that, give us more authority, we would have gotten the job done, because that's where they thrive. They thrive in chaotic situations. And, You know, what people have to realize, too, when you look at Hezbollah, whatever you think of them, terrorist organization or whatever, I mean, they have elected officials in Lebanon. I mean, they run in elections. You know, they run campaigns. They make speeches. They knock on doors, and they win. And so they're representative. They have a pretty strong representation there. But I think you nailed it. I think they come out of this thing in Lebanon stronger, and they're going to be like, hey, put us in charge, and this kind of stuff is not going to happen.
Right. And they've got, like we said, they've got the organization to make it work. I mean, you and I both know, we've been in and out of politics for a long time. It's the ground game that counts.
Right.
It's the guy that goes out and knocks on doors. It's the guy that does you a favor. The congressman who's got a good constituent relations office.
Oh, Hezbollah has that. Ambassador Patrick Theros, we're out of time. I want to thank you, sir, for being with us today. Great analysis on Lebanon. See, that's one of the reasons I love having you on. You did very deep analysis on that. Hezbollah comes out the big winner. I hadn't really looked at it that way. After listening to you, I'm convinced you're 100% right. And they do have the ground game. They have a political ground game that no one else has. And I think they come out of this basically next election with more control in Lebanon. Ambassador Patrick Theros, thank you for being with us, sir. It's always an honor to have you on.
Keep up the good work. Love you.